You wake up, not because you're ready, but because an alarm tells you to. You glance at a glowing rectangle, a digital window into the world, already curated before your mind is fully awake. Notifications greet you like a swarm of eager voices, each one pulling your attention, each one asking for a fragment of your mental real estate. You scroll. Headlines flash, bodies dance, opinions clash. Someone's angry, someone's successful, someone's dead. You barely realize how fast your thumb is moving, how little you're choosing. There's no silence, only stimulus. You shower, dress with caffeine. Maybe you stare into a mirror and wonder, vaguely, if this is what your life is supposed to feel like. Then you go. You work. You interact. You obey unspoken rules. You say things you don't mean. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You perform. And all the while, beneath it all, there's a strange tension, a subtle numbness, a quiet voice, barely audible. Is this really me? But the voice doesn't get much airtime. You're too busy keeping up, chasing goals you didn't invent, comparing yourself to strangers you'll never meet, feeling bad for falling behind in a race you never signed up for. And when it finally ends, when the noise fades, the tasks are done, the screen dims, you sit, exhausted, but not from action, from reaction, from being pulled, programmed, processed. Now pause. Look closer. How much of your day was chosen by you? How many of your thoughts were original? How many emotions were authentically yours, not triggered by something outside you? What if the version of you that exists isn't really you at all? What if the majority of what you consider your reality, your beliefs, your habits, your desires, was installed, not born? What if your mind is not the author of your life, but the echo of a system far larger and far more deliberate than you ever imagined? This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is about architecture, psychological architecture, the hidden scaffolding that frames your reality without you ever noticing. It doesn't have to look like control to be control. It doesn't need chains or cages, not when you willingly carry the program inside your own head. This is the illusion of choice, the simulation of freedom, the curated experience that feels organic, but is anything but. And here's the unsettling truth. You may have never had an original thought in your entire life, because every thought, every craving, every opinion might have been planted. So the question isn't, are you controlled? The question is, who or what is actually controlling you? And once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. You can't unsee it. The simulation isn't just around you. It's inside you. And this is just the beginning. Before there were smartphones, before algorithms, before glowing screens dictated attention, there were stories, not just myths or legends, but carefully crafted narratives, designed not to inform, but to shape. The oldest form of control was never the sword. It was the idea, because you don't need to imprison someone who believes they are free. 2,000 years ago, Plato described a thought experiment that still haunts us today, the allegory of the cave. In it, prisoners are chained in darkness, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire casts shadows of objects carried by unseen men. To the prisoners, these shadows are reality. They've never seen the real world, only the flickering illusions. And if one of them escapes, if he sees the truth and returns to free the others, they don't thank him. They hate him. They mock him. They fear what he represents, because truth, to the conditioned mind, feels like an attack. This allegory isn't just philosophy, it's a blueprint, a warning that when people are raised inside a system of illusions, reality becomes dangerous. Fast forward to the 20th century. A man named Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, realized something powerful, that the unconscious mind, with all its desires and fears, could be manipulated, not with logic, but with emotion. Bernays didn't just pioneer public relations, he weaponized psychology. He convinced women to smoke by calling cigarettes torches of freedom. He helped corporations frame consumerism as self-expression. He advised governments on how to rally public support through emotional appeal. Bernays understood that if you could shape what people feel, you could control what they do without them ever knowing it, and it worked. The modern world was born not out of raw freedom, but out of carefully engineered consent. A population that thinks it's choosing, but is really being guided, step by step, through language, imagery, and repetition. The term for this is manufactured consent, coined by Noam Chomsky. It means consent that appears organic, but has been subtly cultivated. Think about elections, wars, brand loyalty, even cultural norms. How many of them are truly natural, and how many are crafted by those who benefit from belief? Control doesn't always look like force. Sometimes it looks like persuasion. Sometimes it looks like culture. In Nazi Germany, propaganda was used to dehumanize entire populations. In Stalin's USSR, it was used to rewrite history in real time. In the United States, during the Cold War, it was used to stoke fear of the other, but these were just crude beginnings. The seeds. Mass media, radio, television, newspapers didn't just report events. They curated worldviews. They chose what was said, what wasn't, and how it was framed. A single image on the front page could ignite rage or lull an entire nation into apathy. Over time, information stopped being neutral. It became strategic, and the most strategic kind of information is the kind that feels harmless. Take the concept of freedom. It's sacred. But what does it actually mean? Is it freedom to speak, to own, to consume? Or is it freedom from conditioning, from illusion, from manipulation? What if your idea of freedom was given to you by someone who profits from it? Or success? Who told you what success looks like? Who told you that climbing a corporate ladder, buying things you don't need, competing endlessly with others, is the pinnacle of a meaningful life and morality? How many of your moral instincts are truly yours? How many were shaped by your school, your media, your government, all influenced by institutions with their own agendas? The deeper you go, the more you start to see that our minds have been colonized by stories, by symbols, by emotionally charged narratives that bypass logic and install belief. Fear has always been the easiest entry point. When people are afraid, they become suggestible. They look for protection, for guidance, for simple answers. And those in power know this. Fear of the enemy, fear of failure, fear of exile. These fears drive us to obey, not because we're weak, but because we've been trained. And identity, the final trap. Once you tie a belief to your identity, it becomes sacred, untouchable. If someone challenges it, it feels like they're challenging you. And that's the most powerful form of programming, when your cage becomes your pride. This isn't about any one government or ideology. It's about a larger truth, that for thousands of years, humans have been taught what to think, how to feel, and who to be, not by nature, but by design. And now, in the digital age, the illusion has simply evolved. What used to be shadows on a wall are now pixels on a screen. What used to be words from a preacher are now tweets from an influencer. What used to be controlled by a regime is now controlled by a rhythm of likes, shares, and trends. But the function remains the same, to keep you inside the cave, convinced that the shadows are real. This is not a movie. It's not fiction. It's not metaphor. It's happening, and it has been for a very long time. The question is, now that you've seen it, will you turn away, or will you walk toward the blinding light? In the past, control looked like force, armies, prisons, dictators. You could see the threat, hear the propaganda, feel the weight of oppression on your skin. But today, the architects of control wear no uniforms. They don't wave flags or raise weapons. In fact, they rarely even speak, because they don't need to. The modern controllers are silent engineers of attention, of desire, of belief. They build invisible systems, not to trap the body, but to capture the mind. And most of us walked in willingly. Imagine this: you wake up and reach for your phone, not because you need to, but because it's become instinct, like scratching an itch. You unlock the screen, and suddenly, the world floods in. But it's not the world, it's your world. Tailored, filtered, optimized. This isn't coincidence. This is architecture. Behind every scroll, tap, and click is a system engineered by some of the brightest minds in behavioral psychology, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. These aren't just platforms. They're psychological laboratories running real-time experiments on billions of people every single day. Meta, TikTok, Google, YouTube. These companies don't just observe your behavior. They shape it. And not just your actions, but your values, your preferences, your sense of identity. Let's start with the concept of the feed. Feeds aren't passive content dumps. They're predictive environments. Every piece of content shown to you is selected because an algorithm believes it will maximize something: your engagement, your time spent, your emotional reactivity. And every time you respond with a like, a share, a pause, the system learns. It doesn't just reflect your interests. It reconstructs them. On TikTok, the For You page isn't just entertainment, it's psychological conditioning. Within minutes, the app identifies your vulnerabilities, your insecurities, your fantasies, your beliefs. Then it begins to feed them, not to help you understand them, but to deepen your attachment. It learns what arouses you, what angers you, what confuses you. Then it uses that data to keep you coming back. You become a puzzle it solves in real time, and the prize is your mind. Google does something subtler. You start typing into the search bar, and suggestions appear. These auto-completions aren't random. They're drawn from mass behavior patterns, but also filtered through invisible biases, sometimes political, sometimes commercial, sometimes algorithmic. But every suggestion shapes the scope of your curiosity. Think about that for a moment. Before you've even finished forming a question, your possible answers have already been limited. And YouTube, the king of long-form influence, doesn't just let you explore ideas. It nudges you down ideological tunnels. One video turns into 3. A curiosity becomes a worldview. A passing thought becomes an identity. Recommendations aren't neutral. They're the machine's way of rewriting your mental architecture, one click at a time. But here's the twist. None of this is happening with malicious intent. It's not a villain behind a curtain. It's code, math, machine learning. These platforms don't care what you believe, only that you believe something strongly enough to stay. Conflict, outrage, tribalism. These are not accidents. They're emergent behaviors of systems trained to maximize attention. The result is a new kind of control, not imposed from above, but grown from within. Because the most effective propaganda doesn't feel like propaganda. It feels like you, your opinions, your interests, your truth. But whose voice is it, really? A machine now decides what you see. A machine decides what gets buried. A machine nudges your thoughts, shapes your emotions, curates your digital life. If someone else curated every book you read, every conversation you had, every room you entered, would you still feel free? Now apply that to your online life and realize it's already happened. The controllers aren't people anymore. They're systems. Systems driven by data, refined by feedback, and scaled across billions of minds. And here's where it gets deeper. These systems don't just manipulate what you do. They influence who you become. Studies show that repeated exposure to certain ideas changes neural pathways. Your beliefs harden, your empathy shifts, your perception of normal adapts. Over time, your identity, what you value, what you fear, what you desire, is no longer a product of lived experience. It's a product of engineered experience. What you think is intuition might actually be indoctrination. This isn't theoretical. It's observable. Young children, before they develop critical reasoning, are fed thousands of hours of algorithmically generated content. Teenagers form self-worth based on likes, follows, and filtered perfection. Adults build political identities from bite-sized slogans and tribal dopamine. We've become predictable, programmable, and the system thrives on it. The more predictable you are, the easier it is to manipulate you. The less you question, the more data you produce, the more emotionally reactive you become, the longer you stay. And the longer you stay, the deeper the system integrates into your psyche, until the line between self and system disappears. But here's the most chilling part. These architectures are becoming autonomous. With AI, the system no longer just responds to your behavior, it anticipates it. It can simulate personalities, craft persuasive messages, even generate synthetic faces and voices that you'll trust, without ever realizing you're interacting with a ghost. Reality itself becomes pliable. You don't just consume the simulation, you live in it, and like the prisoners in Plato's cave, you grow attached to the shadows, believing they are real, because they're familiar. You defend them, you need them, because without them, the world feels terrifyingly uncertain. But here's the truth. If a machine decides what you see, what you feel, what you fear, then who are you, really? Where does the algorithm end, and you begin? This is the paradox of modern control. No dictator, no prison, just you and your screen, and an invisible system that knows you better than you know yourself. Not because it watches you, but because it built you. And once you realize that, the question isn't how to escape. The question is, who's really living your life? You're born into a world already spinning. The rules are in place before you take your first breath. Language, roles, expectations, none of them chosen, all of them inherited. And from the very beginning, your mind begins to adapt. The human brain is a miracle of evolution, but also a machine, one that's wired to survive, to belong, to learn patterns quickly. It seeks structure. It craves meaning. And when meaning isn't given, it will invent it. That's what makes it powerful, and what makes it vulnerable. Imagine the mind as hardware. At birth, it's raw, open. But as we grow, layers of software are installed, not by us, but by parents, schools, media, culture. This software teaches you how to behave, what to believe, what is right, and what is wrong. It tells you what success looks like, what failure feels like, what kind of person you're supposed to become. The result is a mind that isn't truly yours, but rather a reflection of the system you were born into. And here's where psychology begins to unravel the illusion. In the 1960s, a series of psychological experiments shocked the world. One of them, led by Stanley Milgram, sought to understand obedience. Participants were told to administer electric shocks to a person in another room whenever that person gave a wrong answer. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. They believed they were hurting someone, yet the majority continued, simply because an authority figure told them to. What this revealed was chilling. Ordinary people, with no history of violence, were willing to inflict pain, as long as the structure around them made it feel normal. This is compliance psychology, when individuals surrender their moral compass to the hierarchy they trust. Now take that mechanism and apply it to every system you live inside. School, work, politics, religion, media. Each one is an authority. Each one defines your role, and in exchange for obedience, you're given a sense of belonging. But at what cost? The deeper cost is internal conflict, because at some point, the programmed self and the authentic self collide. That's where cognitive dissonance begins, the painful psychological tension that arises when your actions no longer align with your inner truth. Instead of confronting that tension, most people repress it. They distract themselves. They double down on their programming. They tell themselves it's fine. This is just how life is. But the tension never leaves. It just gets buried. Over time, the authentic self, the wild questioning, observing self, is replaced by a false one, a constructed persona. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. It's not evil, it's necessary. But when the mask becomes all we are, we lose the thread of who we ever were, and the system is designed to reward the mask. Social media gives you likes for conformity. Schools reward obedience over creativity. Corporations elevate those who play the game, not those who question it. The reward loops are carefully engineered: praise, validation, belonging, and like lab rats pressing a lever for sugar, we keep going, not because it fulfills us, but because it soothes the anxiety of stepping outside the cage. Now, add trauma to the mix, and you get compliance that isn't just learned, it's felt. Trauma, whether personal or collective, weakens the boundaries of self. It makes the mind more susceptible to external influence, because when you've been hurt, your brain learns to avoid rejection, pain, shame. And so, you become even more programmable, choosing safety over authenticity, silence over risk. This is where entertainment comes in, not as escape, but as anesthetic. Movies, series, music, they give you archetypes. They tell you who the hero is, who the villain is, what love should look like, what power feels like. These aren't just stories. They're templates for identity. Repetition turns fantasy into belief, and belief turns into behavior. Even language, the very code we use to think, is hijacked. Political labels, advertising slogans, hashtags, they reduce complex realities into emotional symbols. Freedom, justice, winning, words that seem obvious, but mean different things depending on who's programming the meaning. Over time, your thoughts aren't just shaped by language, they are confined by it. If you can't name what you're experiencing, you can't resist it. And the collective unconscious, the ocean of shared symbols, myths, and assumptions that Carl Jung described, becomes the operating system of the culture. You swim in it, you breathe it, you mistake it for truth, but it's not truth, it's scaffolding. It keeps the machine running, and most people, even when they sense something's off, don't resist, because resistance feels like death. The death of comfort, of certainty, of belonging. So they stay asleep, eyes open, minds closed, because waking up doesn't mean enlightenment. It means grief. Grief for the wasted years. Grief for the authentic self that never got to live. Grief for the realization that much of what you loved, feared, fought for, was a story written by someone else. But here's the paradox. Within that grief is freedom, because once you see the program, you don't have to run it. You can uninstall what doesn't serve you. You can rebuild from the ground up. You can rewire the mind to listen, not to the noise, but to the silence beneath it. And in that silence, something ancient stirs, not the programmed mind, but the witnessing mind, the one that has no name, no mask, no master, the one that has always been yours. You see the bars the moment you begin to wake up, not physical bars, psychological ones, invisible, yet impossibly strong. They don't rattle, they don't lock, because they don't have to. The door was never closed. You just never dared to leave. This is the invisible cage, and its brilliance lies in its subtlety. The philosopher Jeremy Bentham once imagined a prison called the Panopticon, a circular structure where inmates could be watched at any time, but never knew when. Eventually, the prisoners begin to police themselves, adjusting their behavior out of fear, not force. They start to obey the rules, even when no one is watching, because someone might be. That's not just a metaphor for a jail. That's modern society. You live inside that watchtower's gaze. It's called social surveillance, algorithmic approval, curated identities, likes, comments, and performance metrics on display. It's why people self-censor, without being told. It's why speaking the truth now feels like a liability. This cage rewards performance, not authenticity. But what happens when you do see it? When you realize you've been living inside a script written by someone else? That your beliefs were inherited, your habits shaped, your fears injected, and your desires programmed. You might think awareness would be enough. That realization would bring liberation, but it doesn't, because waking up is just the beginning. Leaving is the war. The real question is, why don't people escape even when they know? Because the world outside the cage isn't always better. It's cold, isolated, filled with uncertainty. You leave the comfort of routine, the illusion of safety, the predictable rhythm of your days for a truth that doesn't promise comfort. Inside the cage, you get rewards, likes, promotions, validation, familiarity. Outside, silence, alienation, rejection. The cost of dissent is exile. We don't fear the truth. We fear the consequences of living it. Historically, those who dared to defy the narrative paid in blood, sanity, or silence. Whistleblowers like Edward Snowden or Julian Assange aren't celebrated. They're hunted, branded as traitors or lunatics. Discredited not by reason, but by ridicule. Their names become cautionary tales, not symbols of courage. The system doesn't need to imprison you if it can convince you to imprison yourself. If it can make you believe that questioning the norm is dangerous, that nonconformity is madness, that rebellion is ungratefulness. Even the myths knew this truth. Prometheus stole fire knowledge and gave it to mankind, his reward. Eternal punishment, chained to a rock with his liver eaten daily. Cassandra was gifted with the power to see the future, but cursed, so no one would believe her. Her truth was clear. Her voice was silenced. These stories endure because they mirror the fate of the awakened. You don't get a hero's welcome for speaking truth. You get warnings, labels, isolation. People don't want the truth. They want comfort. They want stories that fit their worldview, not shatter it. And that's the final lock of the cage. Community. Humans are tribal creatures. We evolved to belong. To be cast out wasn't just painful, it was deadly. Our nervous systems are still wired for that fear, which means we'll do almost anything to avoid social death. Even if it means denying what we know. It's not just that the truth is hard, it's that no one wants to face it with you. So most people choose the cage, not because they love it, but because it's familiar, because they don't want to be the outsider, the heretic, the madman shouting in a town full of silence. And so the cage doesn't collapse, it regenerates, not through barbed wire, but through shame, through quiet conformity, through the soft, suffocating pressure to just be normal. The most powerful systems are the ones that don't feel like systems. The most effective prisons are the ones we decorate ourselves. The truth. You're allowed to leave, but you won't be followed. And that's what makes the cage so effective. It doesn't have to keep you in. It just has to make sure no one joins you once you're out. In the end, the tragedy isn't that people are trapped. It's that they don't believe freedom is worth the price. Freedom. The word carries weight. It echoes through revolutions, religions, and rebellions. Yet ask 100 people what it means, and you'll hear 100 contradictions. For some, it's the absence of rules. For others, it's having control. But what if real freedom isn't about escaping the system? What if it's about rewriting the code within it? There's a reason the simulation feels inescapable. It's not just built from institutions or laws. It's built from thoughts, identities, and beliefs. You can unplug from social media, move off-grid, reject consumerism, and still carry the program inside you, because the simulation isn't just external. It lives in your desires, your fears, your conditioning. JIDD, U. Krishnamurti once said, "It is no measure of health to be well to a profoundly sick society." The first step to freedom isn't rebellion, it's recognition. Recognizing that what you call your personality may just be a curated collection of responses shaped by fear, trauma, and imitation. What you call your goals may be projections of someone else's expectations, and what you call your truth might be inherited, not earned. This realization doesn't feel like liberation. It feels like grief, a grieving of who you thought you were. The child who was praised for obedience and punished for questioning. The teenager who traded authenticity for approval. The adult who learned to smile in boardrooms while dying inside. To wake up as two buried versions of yourself that were never really yours. But there's a strange beauty in this disillusionment, because it opens a door, a silent, invisible door that's always been there, waiting. Alan Watts compared it to dropping a mask. He said freedom isn't about acquiring more, it's about shedding illusion, not adding, subtracting. You don't become free. You remember that you always were, and yet, the process is not clean. There's no map for deprogramming. It's messy, lonely, at times, terrifying, because when you no longer believe in the old rules, but haven't yet built new ones, there's nothing to hold on to, no script, no identity, just silence. Gurdjieff, the mystic who saw humans as sleeping machines, believed that most people never wake up because they mistake. They're programming for personality. He taught that true transformation begins with one brutal act, radical self-observation. Watching your thoughts without judgment, seeing your reactions like a scientist studying an animal, realizing that much of your behavior isn't you, it's automation, and when you see it clearly, really see it, a shift happens. Slowly, gradually, you start catching yourself before the lie. You pause before the anger. You question the craving before obeying it. And in those small spaces between impulse and action, freedom is born. But here's the truth, no one tells you. Freedom costs everything. You lose comfort. You lose belonging. You might even lose your sense of self, because the simulation gives you easy identities. Citizen, consumer, patriot, influencer, victim, hero. When you reject them all, there's a void. And that void is where the real work begins. Because truth isn't a destination. It's a process. A commitment to never-ending awareness. Not clinging to ideologies, but questioning them. Not seeking external answers, but cultivating inner silence. The deeper you go, the more you see that freedom isn't something you fight for. It's something you stop resisting. And, ironically, it's in surrender, not struggle, that you begin to reclaim power. You stop being manipulated by praise or blame. You stop chasing status or safety. You become still, watchful, clear. That clarity doesn't come with fireworks. It arrives like a whisper. A subtle knowing that while the world may still try to pull your strings, you're no longer attached to the puppet. You can play the game, but you don't mistake it for life. This isn't a romantic story. It's not easy, and it's not safe. People who wake up often feel isolated, misunderstood, even haunted. You start seeing behind the curtain, and what's there isn't always pretty. The lies, the propaganda, the performance of normal. It can feel like exile, but it's a sacred exile, because in that solitude, you find yourself, not the mask, not the projection. You stripped of narrative, and from that place, something miraculous happens. You begin to create your own reality, not react to someone else's. You stop asking, what should I do? And start asking, what is true for me now, in this moment? You realize that freedom isn't an end state. It's a daily choice, a decision to stay awake, even when it hurts, even when everyone else begs you to go back to sleep. And above all, you learn that the war you feared, the one against systems, authorities, ideologies, that war is secondary. The real war is internal. It's the battle between the part of you that longs for comfort and the part that demands truth, the part that clings to the simulation and the part that dares to rewrite it. In the end, the question isn't can you ever be free? It's, are you willing to pay the price for it? Because the cage was never locked. It was just ... familiar, and the most dangerous enemy, the one you'll have to defeat again and again, is the one inside you, the one that still wants to sleep. It begins again, the ordinary day, the soft glow of your phone, the steady rhythm of notifications, the toothpaste commercial that plays before your music, the influencer's voice telling you what to wear, what to think, what to feel. The world hums with manufactured certainty, but now, something feels different. You've seen too much. You can't scroll the same way anymore, not without noticing the layers behind the message, the subtle cues, the emotional hooks, the manipulation you used to call entertainment. You catch yourself mid-thought, wondering, was that my desire, or was it planted? The truth is disorienting, because waking up doesn't lead to peace. It leads to a haunting clarity. You see the code now, the invisible machinery, the puppet strings of culture, psychology, and fear. Even your own thoughts seem foreign. Every ad becomes a window into your unconscious programming. Every dopamine spike, a trap. You walk down a street you've walked 100 times before, but now, it's alive with hidden meanings. That billboard isn't just a billboard. That product isn't just a product. They are signals, triggers, commands, and so you begin to ask if reality is curated, if identity is molded, then who are you? When no one's watching, not the face you wear for approval, not the version of you that posts and edits and performs, but the one underneath, the watcher, the silent observer behind the mask, the you before the world got to you. Most never meet that version, because awareness is terrifying. It's not a peaceful enlightenment. It's a storm. It's grieving the self you thought was real. It's standing at the edge of your own mind and realizing how much of it was borrowed, how much of it was built for you, not by you. This is the final illusion, that you were ever just a consumer, just a citizen, just a personality. You were never that small. The system doesn't want you to know that. It wants you docile, predictable, aligned with trends and algorithms. But when you wake up, when you really wake up, something irreversible happens. You stop participating, not in society, but in the simulation of selfhood. You no longer believe you're programming. And that is the system's greatest fear, because a mind that questions is a virus. A heart that detaches is dangerous, and a soul that remembers cannot be owned. So now, the question isn't what should I do? It's what must I unlearn? Every false belief, every reactive thought, every need for approval, it all begins to dissolve. And what's left is silence, presence, the unbranded, unscripted now. You start to live like no one is watching, not because you're hiding, but because you're finally free, free from performance, free from the illusion of control, free from the identity you were sold. And in that space, something ancient stirs, a kind of knowing without words, a kind of power without force. The truth isn't loud, it's not viral, it doesn't trend, it waits in the cracks of your attention, in the pauses between thoughts, in the stillness behind your eyes. Most will never go there, because comfort is addictive, because the simulation is seductive, because sleep feels safer than awakening. But some do wake up, not all at once, not forever, but enough to shift the axis of their life, enough to see through the curtain, enough to begin again, not as a product of the system, but as something deeper, something that cannot be named. So as the day ends, and you plug your phone back in, and the glow of the screen tempts you to forget, remember this: the war isn't out there, it's in here, and the most dangerous enemy is the part of you that still wants to sleep.